Hi, my name is Steven Anaker. I'm the inventor of Steve's Polishing Pro Systems, and I'm going to be talking with you a little bit about engineered stone and the process for removing a scratch or basically bringing back the factory finish. I think the first thing we need to do is we need to understand what we're actually working on. I believe there's a misnomer out there simply because they call it engineered stone. You know, a lot of people think that it's actually stone. In reality, it's not actually stone. It's actually an alloy. So, you know, engineered stone is actually comprised of an aggregate, which is then bound together using a polymer-based binder. Okay, and that binder could be a different polyvinyl, poly blends, acrylic blends, so forth. On top of that, the size of the aggregate makes a difference because that determines how much polymer exposure is exposed to the surface. So the smaller the aggregate, the more exposure of polymer on the surface. All of these things change our polishing dynamic. You know, we wouldn't polish a marble-based material the same that we would, say, a quartz-based material. Quartz is much harder as far as, you know, the Rockwell scale or the Mohs scale. It's much harder, and the marble is actually much softer. So basically, what I like to talk about here as far as your different polymers and aggregates and stuff are concerned is that, you know, got three examples here. This material here on my left is from China, and it is a acrylic-based binder is what's being used to hold this particular material together. Additionally, it's got a basalt aggregate in it, as well as, and that absolute black is another term for that basalt product. And then it also has some marble pieces in it as well. But it's all suspended in an acrylic base. And acrylic will actually etch. So this particular material reacts a lot like marble does in that it's sensitive to acids and you know, for example, vinegar, lemon juice, things of that nature. This second piece here that I have is actually Caesar stone. And this material is actually a very fine particulate, which we have a large polymer exposure, which a lot of people have found that the large polymer exposure materials are more difficult to polish. Well, that's only because we address these in certain steps. As we will get further into this video, you will see us do that. But the larger the polymer exposure, it's actually you've got to get a compound that is designed more for the actual polymer and not as much for the aggregate. So because there's two different things in here, we actually end up doing two separate polishes is actually what we end up doing. So that was the Caesar stone. Now this material here was brought to us from Australia. I believe it was made in Korea. I'm not certain about that, but it's an all-white material. And the polymer and the material itself actually reacted a lot like Caesar stone did as far as the polishing process goes, which tells me then that the polymer or binder that they used in this material is actually very similar to Caesar stones. This actually has kind of a medium type or small to medium type aggregate in it. It is a quartz-based aggregate, whereas the Caesar stone, like I said, has a very fine particulate in it. So that's a little bit about the different materials. You need to be aware too that the more polymer exposure on it, and you will possibly run into some very soft polymers, and you'll be working the surface. And if you get kind of what they call molecular splitting of the polymer, you end up getting kind of an oil slick look on the surface. Well, we have a compound that we designed specifically for those very soft polymers. In other words, they're very high in poly and have very little of anything else in them. And that particular polish is the Micro A polish. And this polish works phenomenal for that. as well as on marbles that have a very high polish on them. I would like to estimate somewhere around 110 to 120 plus as on a gloss meter. This particular polish right here is going to do a very good job for you. Okay, so you're watching this video either by DVD or on the internet. So either way, I'd like to talk a little bit about now what came in your kit, and we'll take a look and see what's in here. So when you open up your kit, you're going to see that you have four 4-inch pads, or they're 101 millimeter pads, and these are the leather pads. These pads are used for polishing your aggregate. Okay, that's what these pads are used for. These are not necessarily for polishing your polymer. The second pad you're going to find when you look in your kit is going to be the Velvet Touch pad. Now this particular one that comes in your kit standard is a 6.5-inch Velvet Touch pad, which is about 165 millimeter. We also have a 75 millimeter Velvet Touch pad as well. In case you're doing small areas, we do offer smaller pads so that you can contain the area, speeding up your process. I will be utilizing the 75 millimeter for this demonstration purposes. The next thing that you're going to see is that you're going to have 4 compounds, okay? You'll have a 3,000 grit compound, you'll have an 8,000 grit compound, you'll have a 14,000 grit compound, and you're going to have a soft polish as well. So the 3,000 grit compound, we use that particular compound typically for getting our texture. That is what its main purpose is. We use the 3,000 grit compound with the Velvet Touch pad, and that we polish out the polymer in order to create our texture of the surface. The other ones, the 8 and the 14,000s, can be used interchangeably depending on the manufacturer that you're working with, and even the soft polish for actually polishing up your aggregate and or your polymer. Some instances, one of these polishes, in fact Caesar Stone 8000, will polish the polymer as well as polish up our aggregate. Other manufacturers, you may find that the 3000 gets you really close. In particular, it's some of the Silestone products. The 3000 will get you very close, and then a little bit of 8000 compound on the leather pad, and just a quick little buff with the Velvet Touch pad, and you'll have a factory finish on that. So let's talk about the different tools now that we use with this product and process. The first thing is that I use for removing damage and things of that nature on these materials is I like to use a random orbit sanding machine, a random orbit sander. In this case, I have a 75 millimeter or 3-inch random orbit machine here. It's variable speed. So I typically run it about medium speed. Basically, you want to run it at the speed that you can control and be consistent on the surface. It does you absolutely no good to go full blast if you can't be consistent. So at what speed it's consistent for you is the speed that you should run it at. So 75 millimeter. You want to make sure that this backer here doesn't wobble around. You want it fairly firm. That is going to assist us in making sure that we end up with a flat surface. The next major tool that we use is a variable speed grinder. This particular grinder goes from 2600 to 10,500. It is variable speed. It is fitted also with a 4-inch backer or backup plate. That's also a 101 millimeter backup plate right there. The other thing that we're going to need is we'll need some towels, terry towels, paper towels, whatever, to wipe up any slurry that we have. As you see when we go through the process, it's actually pretty clean, so cleanup is actually pretty quick. Another thing that I have is I have 3 diamond pads here for this demonstration. I have an 8, a 15, and a 3000. Typically I will carry with me a 400 grit, I'll carry an 800 grit, I'll carry a 1000 grit, then I have a 1500 grit, a 2000 grit, and then my 3000 grit. This gives me flexibility in that for very light damage on the material, I don't have to go clear down, jump on my 400 and then come all the way back up. For instance, maybe my 3000 takes it out, or maybe my 2000 or my 1500 will take it out. And at that case, well, then I've just reduced a bunch of steps, and then I can bring it back. It makes it that much faster. It also will give you a better product because you're not going to end up spending so much time on it. The other thing that we have here is a squirt bottle. This squirt bottle is filled with water. Water is all you need to use. Pretty self-explanatory there. I also have a marker. I use the marker to mark the backs of the pads. When you get these in the kit, there is nothing on them. They're just a generic pad. Once you use them with a compound, well, then you need to write it on the back, because the pad actually will become that. It impregnates with that compound and it holds it. So you don't want to wash these pads out. What you want to do is allow them to air dry and then put them back in the package. Optional thing too, like if you do a lot of edges and you have trouble with burning of your edges and stuff, is this backup plate here is designed to go on your water-fed edge polishing machine. And it changes the action so that it generates no heat at all, allowing you to use virtually any diamond pad in order to polish the edges of your engineered stone. That's why you'll see how this action works when we use the random orbit machine here with the regular diamond pads on the engineered stone, and how we're not getting any burning whatsoever. Well, that's what this does for you in the shop right on your machine. Alright, so let's talk now a little bit about the process. We now understand that all engineered stones are not the same. We know that they have different aggregates. We know that the polymers change, and sometimes change dramatically between manufacturers, which is going to change what grits and stuff we use, and also the duration of how much time we're going to end up spending on the surface of the material. I liken it to, when you hear the term engineered stone, to me it's like basically saying natural stone. In natural stone you've got everything from onyx to travertine, slates, marbles, granites, and so on, clear up to the very hard, quartzite material. Well, when you say engineered stone, it's basically the same thing. Some of the engineered stones are very hard. They got a lot of hard aggregate in them. They got a hard polymer, and they actually polish pretty easily. When you get into the ones that have a large polymer exposure and they're using a very soft polymer binder, it's going to be a much softer material. It can take more time, and you have to be a little bit more careful so that you don't make too much texture on the material. Otherwise, of course, we'll see that. So we have to adjust our process a little bit in order to compensate for what the manufacturer has used in making that particular material. So, the process. I have an acronym that I follow for the process, okay? And that acronym is FTF. And what does that stand for? It stands for footprint, texture, finish. And that's the way that we go through the process. Footprint, texture, and finish, okay? Now, what do I mean by the footprint? Well, in an engineered material, because it does have a polymer in it, the actual polymer will show a polishing pattern. This is exhibited if you take a very uniform piece of material and you cut it in half, and let's say we're doing an L kitchen, you can see that sometimes there's actually looks like one piece is slightly a different color than the other piece. That's because the polymer actually has micro ridges in it, and we've just changed the direction, so the light refraction is not the same between the two pieces because we just changed the direction of them. So we can keep that in mind. That way, when we're removing our damage, we're bringing this material back, we're working the area. What we're trying to do then is just try to keep a forward and back and side to side process until we bring it up to a point where we're going to be actually polishing our aggregate. Once we working on our aggregate, when we're polishing our aggregate, we want to try to follow it as much as possible, but we can change a little bit because the next one, which is our texture, we're going to evaluate our texture, see how much we need. We'll go through the texturing process. Once we've matched texture, then the last thing is the finish. And the finish actually is really addressing the polymer. We're getting the polymer polished back up so that it matches the factory polish. In some instances, after you get done with it, you might see a fog. You could see a light fog on the transition line where you're going from where you've been working to the factory. At that case, we can actually go back to our leather pad with the grinder and work that area some more, and then we'll go back to the random orbit and correct and polish our polymer. So we'll see some of this as we go through the process, but that's the basic process, FTF, footprint, texture, finish. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take my 800 grit pad. I'm going to go ahead and work on this piece of Caesar stone here. I'm going to abrade the surface. I'm going to take the finish right off of this material, show it to you, and then you can watch as I go through the process and bring it back to the factory polish. If time allows, there is a light fog in the surface of the white over here, and I'd like to just show you how to remove that fog, make sure the texture is correct, and bring that back. So let's go ahead and get started here. I'm going to just move a few things here out of my way. Just set these off to the side here. So what I'm going to do is take my water, 2 sprigs of water. We don't need a whole bunch. All we're trying to do is lubricate the surface. This particular machine I have set on a 3, which should put this at about 55 to 6,000 RPM. The thing about random orbit machines is that other than keeping it stable on the surface, it doesn't matter. It's not as crucial as it is when you're using a rotary machine, which can generate heat into your material through friction. So let's just go ahead here. If you notice, I'm going to go side to side and up and down. And I'm not pushing hard, I'm just holding it flat and even on the surface. If you notice, I'm right up on the head. I'm trying to control the abrasive on the surface by staying right over the top of it as much as possible. Now I'm going forward and back. Now this is typically what I do if I had a very light scratch in it. I would probably just jump on it with the 8, get the scratch out and go up. So I'm going to take a look at the surface here. Oh yeah, I can feel it. Smooth across there, rough there. So just by the feel of it, I can tell that I have broken the polish on this material, and for all intents and purposes, they would tell you that this piece is ruined, we have to replace it. But I'm going to show you how to fix it. So let's see if we can get a view of this at all. I'm going to go ahead and kind of move this in different directions, bring it up and around. You can see that hone spot right there. We're going to go ahead now and I'm going to show you how to bring that back. Okay, so I used my 800, and I usually do this process from 800 up. So let's say I'm doing an 8 and a 15 and a 3, or if I'm doing an 8, 1000, 15, 2003, I'm going to do the same process. I run it damp first, and I just did that with the 8. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to dry the surface of this material, and I'm going to dry my pad off, and I'm actually going to use the orbital. I'm going to run it dry on the surface of this material. The reason that I'm doing that is because I'm trying to flatten that aggregate out. If you don't get the aggregate completely flat, then what happens is when you get the polish, and you will get the polish, but it'll be fuzzy looking. Okay, it won't be as crisp and clean as the factory polish. And if that happens, then you go back down, run dry, then run it dry, and if that doesn't get rid of it, then you're gonna have to go wet and then dry and so forth. So basically, at this point now, I've used my 800. I'm going to dry my 800 off, use a towel or or whatever. If you have air and you're doing this at the shop, then maybe you blow some air across it, whatever. We just want to get the excess moisture off the pad. And then we're just going to go over the same area that we worked, but we're going to do it dry. And what I like to do is focus a lot more on the outside of the area that I've worked rather than the center. A lot of people have a tendency to just keep working the center. The center always comes in because it actually gets interaction with the abrasive 4 times for every time the outside does. So with this tool, you're going to watch, you're going to see that I can actually tip it, roll it, move it, change the different angles, and it won't create a divot in it because this isn't a completely different action compared to a grinder. This is a rubbing action. So instead of having the rotary cutting action, we've got a rubbing action. So we can actually control this, and it allows us to really feather in our transition zones, which is crucial to getting the finish on engineered stone. So I'm going to run this dry now. I'm going to be doing a little bit of evaluation as I go through it. Is there a time set for anything? Well, no, because like I said, each engineered material is slightly different. It may go way fast on one material. It could take you 20-30 minutes on another piece of material. It all varies based on the polymer type and the type of aggregate. So I'm just kind of tipping this to the forward. Now I'm tipping it kind of to the side. I'm tipping it back a little bit. To the side again. Forward. Working that outside edge. That's what I want to do. I want to work that outside edge. Bring it up some. And I'll show you that actually running it dry will actually start bringing the finish up more on it. Then we'll knock it down and we'll flatten it some more. And we'll knock it down and flatten it some more. Until we can get that nice clean factory finish. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to look at this, get the light across it so that I can watch my outside edge. What you don't want is dark ring around the outside edge. You want to keep working that until that dark ring is gone. Otherwise what will happen is you're going to end up with a bloom or a ring around where you've been working. So we want to knock that down. We want to bring that coarse fractured zone and smooth it out. That's what we're trying to do here. So that stone is cold. But you can see now what kind of difference we've made from that dark hone spot. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to my 1500. Now that was from a hone spot to where now we actually have a little bit of gloss to it. But going through this process, remember, this is what we're trying to flatten out the quartz and make it as flat as possible so that we can get that clean, crisp picture. So now I'm going to go to a 1500 diamond on it. Now typically I would be using a 75mm pad or 3-inch pad with this machine, but the 4-inch works just as well. It just doesn't allow as much detail that you can get with an actual fitting pad. But for this demonstration, or even if you're in the field, it'll work just fine for you. 2 sprays of water again, and so now I'm just going to go over that same area. And if you notice, I'm kind of bouncing it as I work the outside edge here around where I've worked it. I'm just kind of bouncing it, allowing the abrasive to interact with our transition zone. Changing the amount, the pressure so that I follow the outside edge. It was getting a little bit dry, so I'm just going to add a little bit of water. Just keep a little bit of a slurry going. Not a whole lot. We don't want to, have a whole bunch of water on it, but just keep it gently lubricated. Let's take a look at this, see where we're at. So looking at this piece here, you can see where it has kind of dulled the material out here. It's right around in that area right there. Once again, now I'm going to dry my pad, and I'm going to run dry over this, paying particular attention to the outside ring, making sure that it's all just fades right into the factory. If you get to the end and you haven't done that step, making sure that everything is feathered in, when you polish it up, it'll polish up beautifully, except that you'll have this polished ring where you've repaired the surface of the material, or a line in the case of doing seams or something of that nature. So just be aware, you really need to focus a lot on the outside, and then bring your center in to match. And you may notice that I'm changing the angle of the machine so that I can go around that abraded surface in multiple angles, making sure that I actually get it blended really well and feathered out, which is working wonderfully. Just multiple angles, left, up on the right, forward, on the back, and just work that transition zone. Okay, so you can see the flat spot that's been generated there. You can see that it's pretty consistent. Not so much that you can see a ring or anything of that nature. The hone is gone. We've gotten it pretty flat. And I'm just going to keep moving different angles here so you can get some idea of what we're talking about. All in all, it's looking pretty darn good. So now I'm going to do the same thing with my 3000 grit. 2-3 bricks of water on it, and now we're going to go and run our 3000 the same exact way. Now I'm going to go ahead and dry that 3000 pad, and we'll go over her dry. Take a look at this now. What I'm looking for is see how my transition zone is. You can kind of see I can see that I have a little bit more work I really need to do right here. You may be able to see it, but you can see how flat that is compared to the surrounding area, but the polish is coming up pretty good. So I'm just going to wipe this down here with just a little bit of acetone, and then I like to use a little denatured alcohol after the fact, just to get the excess residue of the acetone off the material. As well as what a lot of people don't know is if you trap acetone on the surface of some of these materials, what it will do is, see a little bit of green there we got off, is that it will actually burn the polymer. It will affect the polymer. I've done many repairs where they have an engineered stone top, and their daughter is in there doing her fingernails, and she gets acetone on her cotton ball. Cotton ball's sitting on the thing, she puts a towel over it, the acetone is not allowed to evaporate, and it ends up distorting the polymer on the material. So whenever you do this, you just want to make sure it's thoroughly clear. It works good for cleaning up, but I would just caution you, if you have tape or anything that can trap it on the surface, it more than likely will cause damage. So just make sure that you're aware of that, and clean it up properly, as well as using denatured alcohol. I think denatured alcohol is probably the best thing because it's very safe for it. It cleans all the excess oil and such off from the surface. And if you've done some fills and you've had problems with fills popping out and you've been using acetone to clean it, a lot of times that can be attributed to the fact that acetone leaves a light oil residue behind and doesn't allow your repair to actually stick. Just be aware of that. So now I think we have a pretty good setup there. I need to work that one corner like I said, so I'm going to just go ahead and put this back on and focus on that corner there. So if you notice through the process, I've been going forward and back, side to side. I can change the angle of the machine, but I'm always still trying to go, forward, back, side to side in order to kind of cross-cut that outside ring. If you notice, it just kind of faded away, looks like a flat spot. That's perfect, that's what you want. So now I'm ready to move on to actually polishing the aggregate, because the first part of this process is we're focusing on damage removal, maintaining the footprint, and getting the quartz polished up to the factory polish.